Captain Elias Marlowe moved silently through the rubble-strewn streets of the abandoned city. The hum of distant battle echoed through the night, but it felt muffled here, as though the world itself had been beaten down and exhausted. The city, once a thriving human colony, now lay in ruins after the relentless assault from the Vraxi, an alien race that had spared nothing in their quest to conquer the galaxy. Elias was used to this, used to the silence, the destruction, and the grim reality that each day could be his last. He was a soldier, a commander of the last surviving human resistance group, fighting for a future that seemed to slip further away with each passing hour. The war had dragged on for years, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. Elias' heart was heavy, but his resolve was steel. He had no choice but to keep fighting, for the survivors, for the people he couldn't afford to lose. Tonight's mission was no different from any other. The Resistance had received word of a potential supply cache hidden deep within the city, left behind by the last remnants of human military forces. It could mean enough food and ammunition to keep their fighters going for another month, maybe more. The idea of it kept Elias moving through the darkened streets, every footstep a reminder of how much was at stake. He had just rounded a corner, his hand instinctively brushing the cold metal of his rifle, when he heard a sound. A faint, trembling noise, almost a whisper but too distinct to ignore. Elias froze. His heart rate quickened, his instincts on high alert. There were few survivors left in this war zone, and most of them were either dead or loyal to the Vraxi. Anyone else would have been either a threat or someone to rescue. But who would be out here, at this hour, in the middle of a city like this? Elias crept forward, his boots soft against the cracked pavement, until he reached the source of the sound. What he saw took him by surprise. A woman. She was lying against a broken pillar, her face obscured by her hair, her body trembling violently. The moment Elias stepped closer, she lifted her head and he saw her eyes. They were wide, filled with fear and streaked with tears. Her gaze locked onto him, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Elias' heart skipped a beat, but his training kicked in, forcing him to stay calm. He raised his rifle slightly, his voice low and cautious. "Who are you?" he asked, his words cutting through the tense air. "Are you one of them?" The woman blinked rapidly, her body still shaking. She didn't speak at first, and Elias thought maybe she was too terrified to respond. But then, as if compelled by something deeper than fear, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You. You saved me." Her voice cracked, her words thick with emotion. Elias' grip on his rifle loosened just a little. He had heard strange things in this war, but this was different. The woman looked human, but there was something about her that felt out of place. She was dressed in torn clothes, as if she had been running for a long time, and there was something hauntingly familiar about her. "Saved you," Elias repeated, confused. "I don't know who you are. What do you mean, saved you?" She struggled to sit up, her movements slow and pained, as if her body had been through more than it could handle. She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm not what you think. I'm not one of them. I need your help." Elias stared down at her, uncertainty flooding his thoughts. The Vraxi had a way of infiltrating human resistance forces. They could disguise themselves, manipulate minds, and even plant false memories. The thought that this woman might be a spy, a trap, made Elias wary. But there was something in her eyes, a genuine plea that made him hesitate. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice softening slightly. "And why are you here?" The woman's lip quivered, and she wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice weak. I'm not one of the Vraxi. I was cast away." She took a deep breath as though gathering the strength to continue, but the words didn't come easily. "I am not a soldier. I don't fight. I'm just a refugee, a survivor," she managed, her voice cracking. "I'm one of the Linthari." Elias frowned, the name unfamiliar to him. "Linthari," he repeated, trying to recall if he had ever heard of them. Lyra nodded, her expression distant as though the memory of her people caused her pain. We were peaceful until the Vraxi came. They destroyed our planet, killed everyone. Except me, I've been running ever since. Hiding, I thought I was safe, but now they're here, they're everywhere. Elias felt a flicker of sympathy but also suspicion. Was she telling the truth, or was this a trap? He didn't have time for distractions. His mission was clear and his duty was to his people. Still, the desperation in her eyes was impossible to ignore. "You're alone?" Elias asked. She nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. I had family, a sister." But Lyra's voice trailed off and she seemed lost in thought for a moment. The grief in her eyes deepened and Elias' heart tightened. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Elias said, his voice softer now. "Come with me. The Resistance will protect you." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You would help me? After everything?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. "Everyone deserves a chance." The woman reached out, trembling as she grabbed his arm, clinging to him as though he were her last lifeline. Her tears wet his sleeve, and for a moment Elias stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She was vulnerable, broken, and Elias felt a strange, protective instinct stirring within him. "I'll help you," he said quietly, gently pulling her to her feet. "Come on. We're getting out of here." Lyra didn't protest. She simply nodded, wiping her face as best she could, and clung to Elias as they began walking back toward the Resistance base. But as they moved, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this woman, Lyra, was far from what it seemed. The weight of her past, the tears she shed, the way she had looked at him, all pointed to something more than just a lost refugee. Something that would change everything. Elias and Lyra moved quickly through the city's dark, shattered streets. The distant sounds of battle still rumbled in the background, but here, where the wreckage of once thriving buildings now stood as hollow monuments to humanity's lost dreams, there was only the eerie quiet of a forgotten place. Lyra walked closely beside Elias, her small frame trembling slightly with each step, but she never let go of his arm. The base was only a few kilometers away, but to Elias it felt like an eternity. He was used to moving fast, always alert, but this time there was something different. He had a responsibility to protect the few survivors left. But as he glanced at Lyra, the woman who had fallen into his arms only hours before, he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to her story than she had shared. They passed by the remains of a destroyed market. What once had been a place filled with laughter and trade now lay covered in dust and rubble. It was a grim reminder of how much had been lost. The Resistance base, a hidden compound located beneath an old factory, was one of the last safe havens for the remaining humans. But even there, safety was never guaranteed. Elias knew that. Every day, the Vraxi grew closer, their forces overwhelming the human resistance at every turn. As they approached the base, Elias spotted a few familiar faces standing guard at the entrance. They were weary, battle-hardened soldiers, the last of a broken army. But the sight of Lyra, a stranger, someone who could be anything, even a threat, would surely raise suspicion. "Elias, who's this?" one of the guards asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "She's with me," Elias replied, his tone firm but cautious. "Get her inside." "She's not a threat." The guard didn't look convinced, but he stepped aside without further question. Inside the base, Elias led Lyra through the narrow hallways, past soldiers working at computer terminals and medics tending to the wounded. The base was small, but it was all they had left. At the far end, a room filled with soldiers gathered around a table covered in maps and plans greeted them. Elias was greeted with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The last thing any of them needed was a potential enemy in their midst. "She's not one of them," Elias assured them as Lyra sat down in the corner of the room, her eyes scanning the surroundings nervously. One of the resistance leaders, a woman named Commander Iris, approached Elias. "Are you sure about this?" Iris asked, her voice low but filled with skepticism. "I don't know what to think, but she claims to be human. Or at least from a species like ours," Elias replied, sitting down beside Lyra. "Her people were destroyed by the Vraxi. She's running from them, same as us." Iris studied Lyra for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll keep an eye on her, but don't let your guard down. We don't have the luxury of trusting anyone fully anymore." Elias agreed with a silent nod, his mind racing. As he watched Lyra's trembling hands clutch the edges of the seat, he felt a surge of sympathy, but there was still too much doubt. Who was she really? Why had she come to him of all people? Later that evening, as the base settled into uneasy quiet, Elias found himself unable to sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the base's machinery filling the space. His mind kept returning to Lyra's words, the way she had clung to him in the streets, the desperation in her eyes. He couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something in her story that didn't add up, but the look in her eyes when she spoke of her people. It felt real. Suddenly, a quiet knock on his door broke his thoughts. Elias sat up quickly, reaching for his weapon instinctively, but relaxed when he saw Lyra standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to talk." Elias motioned for her to come in. "What's on your mind?" Lyra hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her ragged shirt. She seemed smaller in the dim light, as though the weight of everything was crushing her. "You don't believe me, do you?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Elias frowned. "It's not that, it's just, this is all happening so fast, I don't know what to think." She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I understand." "I wouldn't trust me either." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "But you have to. I need you to understand why I'm here, why I'm the one who came to you." Elias leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Why?" Lyra took a deep breath. "The Vraxi, they didn't just destroy my planet. They tore apart my family. I'm the last of my kind." Her voice cracked as she spoke the words, and for the first time since Elias had met her, she seemed truly broken. "They destroyed everything, and now they want me dead too." Elias remained silent, but inside, a wave of empathy washed over him. He knew loss, everyone here knew loss, but this was different. Lyra's pain was raw, like something he hadn't seen in years. "The Vraxi killed your people, but why did you come to me?" he asked, still unsure of her motives. Lyra's gaze dropped and she rubbed her eyes. Because you're the only one who can stop them." Elias blinked in confusion. "Me, I'm just one man. I'm not even sure how much longer we can keep fighting." "No, not just you," Lyra whispered, "but humanity, the humans. You're stronger than you know. The Vraxi don't understand that. They see you as weak, as nothing. But I've seen it, how you fight, how you never give up. You're the ones who will turn the tide." Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. "We're losing this war. Every day they grow stronger." Lyra shook her head slowly. "They're strong, yes, but they have a weakness, something they fear, something they won't expect, and I know where it is. I know where it's hidden." Elias' heart began to race. This was it, the reason Lyra had come here. She wasn't just another refugee, another lost soul looking for sanctuary. She had a plan, a way to fight back, a way to end this war. "What are you talking about?" Elias asked urgently. "Where is it?" Lyra's eyes gleamed with something new, a spark of hope that had been absent before. "The Vraxi have been searching for it for years, a relic hidden on Earth, the last place they ever thought to look. A place that only a human could reach." Elias leaned forward, his mind working quickly. "And you think this relic can stop the Vraxi?" "Yes," Lyra said firmly. "If we find it and use it, we can destroy the Vraxi's command center, disrupt their entire operation. You'll have the chance to finish what they started, but we can't waste time." Elias sat back, his mind racing with the possibilities. The Vraxi had a weakness, something that could change the tide of this war. And Lyra, the woman he had just met, was offering him the key to victory. It seemed too good to be true, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in her voice. "Where is it?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's face tightened. "I'll show you," she said. "But we have to leave now, before they find us." Elias's mind raced as he walked beside Lyra through the narrow hallways of the Resistance base. Every word she had spoken about the relic echoed in his head. The Vraxi, their supposed conquerors, had a weakness. A single relic hidden on Earth had the power to destroy their command center. Elias could hardly believe it. For years, humanity had fought with little hope, barely holding their ground against an enemy far stronger and more advanced. Yet here was Lyra, a stranger with a claim that could change everything. They had to act fast. The Vraxi were relentless. Time was running out. As they passed the rooms filled with soldiers, medics, and technicians, Elias' thoughts remained on Lyra's words. He wasn't used to hope, he was used to surviving. But this felt like a real chance. The base was filled with soldiers already weary from constant fighting, yet when Elias shared the news about the relic, he could see their faces shift. A spark of hope, something they hadn't felt in years, flickered in their eyes. They were ready to fight again. Commander Iris, always the practical one, had gathered a group of trusted officers. "We leave in the morning," she said firmly, outlining their plan. The idea of risking everything on a relic, a story passed down from an unknown alien, still left some of the soldiers uneasy. But none of them dared question Elias' decision. They followed him because they knew him to be a leader, a man who wouldn't give up. Lyra sat in the corner, her head lowered, her mind clearly somewhere else. She hadn't said much since the conversation in Elias' quarters. She looked haunted, as though the weight of her past was too heavy to bear. Elias wanted to ask her more questions, but he also knew she was carrying a burden too great to share easily. Instead, he focused on the mission ahead. The Vraxi's main force was advancing toward Earth's last stronghold, and their base was the last line of defense. If they didn't act now, the Vraxi would crush humanity for good. The relic, if it existed, was their one shot. As the group prepared to leave the base, the soldiers gathered their gear, ready for the unknown journey ahead. Lyra, who had once seemed so fragile and lost, now stood up. Her face was determined, and though her hands still shook slightly, she was focused. Elias couldn't help but admire the change in her. "You're sure you know where the relic is?" Elias asked quietly, making sure he understood the situation fully. Lyra nodded. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady but not without a trace of fear. "But the journey will be dangerous. The Vraxi know we're looking for it. They'll do everything they can to stop us." "We're ready for them," Elias replied, his voice calm but firm. His confidence in his team was unwavering. They had faced impossible odds before. This wouldn't be any different. As night fell, the team set out, moving through the darkened forest at the outskirts of the base. The wind howled through the trees, and the stars above were barely visible through the thick clouds that had gathered. The cold air bit at their skin, but it didn't matter. They had a mission, they had purpose, and that alone was enough to keep them moving forward. Lyra walked ahead of Elias, guiding the group. Her steps were steady, but every so often she would glance behind her, as if making sure no one was following. Elias could sense her unease, but he didn't push her. She had already revealed so much. He could see the burden she carried, the memories of a destroyed world, a lost family, and now, a task that could either save humanity or condemn it. They reached the edge of the forest by morning, the faintest light peeking over the horizon. They would have to move quickly if they were to avoid detection. Elias' eyes scanned the area, but there was no sign of the Vraxi forces yet. He knew it wouldn't be long before they were spotted. The Vraxi had eyes everywhere. "This is it," Lyra whispered, stopping at a large, flat rock. She knelt, brushing away the dirt and moss that covered it, revealing an ancient stone marking. Elias' heart skipped a beat. The relic was supposed to be here, this was the place. But how would they find it? What kind of power would it hold? The relic is buried here, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's not just a thing to be dug up. It's an ancient device activated by the will of those who are worthy. Elias furrowed his brow. Worthy? Yes, she said, glancing up at him. The relic was built by an ancient civilization, long before the Vraxi or even my people existed. It was meant to be a safeguard, a fail-safe in case a race like the Vraxi ever rose to power. The only way it works is if the one who activates it is pure of heart, someone who doesn't want to destroy, but to protect. Elias took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He had seen many things in his time as a soldier, but the idea of an ancient, powerful device being activated by something as intangible as worthiness seemed like a long shot. But he couldn't back down now, not when they were so close. The group gathered around the stone as Lyra began to chant softly, the words foreign to Elias but filled with a strange, melodic rhythm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. Elias stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. His team did the same, all eyes on Lyra. "It's working," she said, her voice filled with awe. "The relic is responding." Suddenly, the earth beneath the stone cracked open, revealing a dark, glowing object deep within. It was cylindrical, with intricate markings carved into its surface. The object pulsed with a strange energy, its light flickering in time with the beating of Elias' heart. Lyra stepped forward, her face illuminated by the relic's glow. She reached out, placing her hand gently on the object. The moment her skin touched it, the light flared brighter, casting shadows across the group's faces. Elias couldn't look away. There was power in that object, power unlike anything he had ever felt. This was it, the hope they had been waiting for. This was their chance, but just as quickly as the light had flared, it faded. The object dimmed and a sharp, loud crack echoed through the air. Elias' heart raced as he scanned the surroundings, but he saw nothing, until the ground beneath them began to tremble. "They've found us," Lyra said, her voice filled with dread. "The Vraxi." Elias' grip tightened on his weapon as he turned to face his team. "Prepare for battle," he shouted. "Everyone, get into position." The team scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Elias' eyes darted across the landscape. He could hear the unmistakable hum of Vraxi ships above them, the low thrum of their engines sending vibrations through the ground. In the distance, he could see the first of the Vraxi soldiers emerging from the forest, their dark armor blending with the shadows. There were too many of them, they couldn't fight them all off. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "We don't have time to fight them all. We have to activate the relic. It's the only way." Elias' mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. This wasn't the battle he had expected, but it was the one he had been preparing for. If they couldn't fight the Vraxi, they had to use the relic. They had no other choice. "Do it," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Activate it." Lyra nodded, stepping toward the relic. The Vraxi were closing in fast. Elias' team was ready, but the battle would be fierce. As Lyra placed both hands on the relic, Elias prayed that the power she had unlocked would be enough. The relic pulsed again, brighter this time, and Elias felt the ground beneath him rumble. It wasn't just the power of the relic, it was something else, something deep within him, something that told him this was their moment. The Vraxi soldiers charged forward, but just as they reached the group, the sky above them crackled with energy. A massive beam of light shot into the air, striking the Vraxi ships above. The energy wave spread out, disintegrating anything it touched. For the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to hope.